What if I told you that one of history's most terrifying prophecies about the end times was deliberately hidden from you? That somewhere in the shadows of ancient manuscripts lies a vision so disturbing, so precise in its details about our current world, that religious authorities have spent centuries keeping it buried. Tonight we're diving into the forbidden prophecy of Ezra, a text so controversial that it was banned from most versions of the Bible itself. But here's what they don't want you to know. This isn't just another dusty religious document gathering cobwebs in some monastery vault. This is a prophetic vision that speaks directly to our time, describing events and symbols that seem to mirror exactly what we're witnessing in today's world. My name is on this channel because I believe truth shouldn't be locked away in forbidden archives or buried beneath centuries of religious politics. And if you're here, if something drew you to click on this video, then you're ready to hear what they didn't want you to know. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like the spiritual teachings you grew up with were missing crucial pieces? Like there were chapters torn from the story, questions that were never allowed to be asked? That feeling isn't paranoia, it's recognition. Because there were pages torn out, and tonight we're putting them back. Before we begin this journey into the forbidden, I need you to understand something crucial. What you're about to discover isn't just ancient history. It's a prophecy that could hold the key to understanding where we're headed as a civilization. The vision we're exploring tonight has been called one of the most detailed and specific apocalyptic prophecies ever recorded, yet most people have never even heard of it. So if you're ready to uncover hidden truths that challenge everything you thought you knew about biblical prophecy and the end times, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because what we're about to reveal is just the beginning of a much deeper mystery. Now let's talk about Ezra. Not the sanitized version you might have heard about in Sunday school, but the real Ezra. The visionary who saw something so shocking about the future that religious authorities decided it was too dangerous for ordinary believers to read. The story begins with a man consumed by the most fundamental questions that haunt every thinking person. If God is just, why do the righteous suffer while the wicked prosper? Why does evil seem to triumph while good people struggle? These weren't just philosophical musings for Ezra. These were burning questions that drove him to fast for 7 days. To cry out to heaven for answers, to demand that God explain the apparent injustices of the world. But when Ezra received his answer, what came back wasn't comfort. It wasn't a gentle reassurance about divine plans working in mysterious ways. What he received was a vision so unsettling, so specific about the end of days that it would be suppressed for centuries. The text we're discussing tonight is found in 2nd Esdras, also called 4th Ezra, and it contains something that makes religious authorities deeply uncomfortable. A direct, unfiltered vision of how this world will end, complete with symbols and timelines that seem to point directly to our current moment in history. Here's where it gets truly dangerous. In the middle of this prophetic vision, Ezra sees something that has captivated and terrified interpreters for nearly 2,000 years. He witnesses a massive eagle rising from the sea, and creature of such power and influence that it dominates the entire earth. But this isn't just any eagle, this is a beast with 12 wings and 3 heads, each representing different phases of a final world empire that will rule before the end comes. Think about that image for a moment. An eagle, the symbol that has represented empires throughout history. Rome used the eagle. Nazi Germany used the eagle. And today, which nation uses the eagle as its primary symbol? The United States of America. But here's what makes this prophecy truly chilling. Ezra doesn't just see this eagle ruling the world, he sees its wings being plucked off one by one, representing the decline and fall of this final empire. He witnesses the 3 heads devouring each other in the final phase, symbolizing internal conflict and civil war. And then, at the very end, he sees this entire system being judged and destroyed by what he calls the Lion of Judah. Now, before you dismiss this as ancient superstition, consider this. The vision contains specific details about the sequence of rulers, the timeline of events, and the characteristics of this final empire that have made modern interpreters wonder if Ezra was seeing our world, our time, our current geopolitical situation. The text describes an empire that starts with great power and influence, that spreads its wings across the earth, that becomes the dominant force in global affairs. But it also predicts that this empire will become corrupt, that it will oppress its own people, that it will face internal division and ultimately collapse before the final judgment arrives. Does any of this sound familiar? Are we witnessing the fulfillment of a prophecy that was written nearly 2,000 years ago? But here's the part that religious authorities found most threatening. Ezra's vision doesn't just predict the end of political systems, it predicts the end of religious systems that have forgotten their true purpose. The prophecy suggests that in the final days, divine truth won't belong to those who wear robes and stand behind pulpits, but to those who, as Ezra puts it, have not been corrupted by the wine of human religions. This is why 2nd Esdras was banned from most versions of the Bible. It doesn't just challenge political power, it challenges religious power. It suggests that institutional authority, whether political or religious, will be judged and found wanting in the final days. The vision continues with even more specific details. Ezra sees the eagle's wings representing different phases of power within this final empire. Some interpreters suggest these wings represent different presidencies, different political eras, different phases of American dominance on the world stage. And according to the prophecy, we're living in the time of the final wings, the last phase before the 3 heads appear and begin devouring each other. But what makes this prophecy particularly unsettling is how it describes the internal characteristics of this final empire. The text speaks of a nation that becomes divided against itself, where the people lose faith in their institutions, where corruption spreads through every level of government, where the powerful prey upon the weak while claiming to serve justice. The prophecy describes a time when the rulers of this empire will be more concerned with maintaining their own power than serving their people, when the nation's wealth will be concentrated in the hands of a few while the many struggle, when the empire's military might will be used not to protect the innocent but to advance the interests of the elite. Again, does any of this sound familiar? Ezra's vision goes on to describe the spiritual condition of the people during this final phase. He sees a generation that has access to more religious information than any previous generation, yet remains spiritually empty. People surrounded by churches and religious content, yet starving for genuine connection with the divine. The prophecy speaks of a time when religious institutions will multiply while true spiritual understanding becomes rare, when impressive religious performances will mask the absence of genuine sacred presence, when people will go through the motions of faith while their hearts remain cold and distant from God. This isn't just prediction. This feels like diagnosis, a precise description of the spiritual condition of our current world. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Ezra's prophecy is how it describes the end of this final empire. The vision shows the eagle's power being stripped away not through external conquest, but through internal collapse. The three heads that represent the final phase of leadership begin fighting among themselves, each trying to devour the others. Some interpreters see in this a prediction of civil war, of political factions turning against each other, of the very foundations of the empire crumbling from within. Others see it as describing the collapse of the deep state, the exposure of hidden powers, the final revelation of corruption that has been operating in secret. The prophecy describes this internal destruction as being so complete that the entire system collapses, leaving the way clear for what Ezra calls the reign of the Messiah, the Lion of Judah who will establish a kingdom based on justice rather than power. Now you might be wondering why this prophecy was considered so dangerous that it had to be suppressed. Why couldn't ordinary believers be trusted to read and interpret these visions for themselves? The answer lies in understanding what happens when people begin to see current events through the lens of biblical prophecy, when they start to recognize that the systems they've been taught to trust and respect might actually be the very powers that biblical prophecy warns against. Religious authorities have always been uncomfortable with prophecy that suggests their institutions are temporary. Political authorities have always been threatened by predictions that their power will be judged and found wanting. When you combine both religious and political sensitivity into one prophetic vision, you get something that both types of authority want to suppress. But suppression has never been able to eliminate truth entirely. Even after centuries of being banned from most Bibles, even after systematic efforts to keep these visions hidden, the prophecy of Ezra has survived. And now in our time, when the symbols and events he described seem to be manifesting all around us, people are rediscovering this forbidden text and asking whether we might be living in the very days he foresaw. The eagle with its 12 wings and 3 heads isn't just an ancient symbol. According to those who study this prophecy, it's a roadmap to understanding our current moment in history, a guide to recognizing the signs of the times, a warning about what's coming and a promise about what lies beyond the collapse. But to understand the full implications of Ezra's vision, we need to dig deeper into the specific details he recorded. We need to examine the timeline he was shown, the sequence of events he witnessed, the precise characteristics of each phase of this final empire's rise and fall. We need to explore how this banned prophecy connects to other biblical predictions about the end times, how it relates to the visions in Daniel, the revelations given to John, the warning spoken by Jesus himself about the last days. Most importantly, we need to understand what this prophecy suggests about our role in these final events. Are we simply passive observers watching history unfold? Or do we have a part to play in the drama that Ezra witnessed in his vision? Because according to the forbidden prophecy, the end of the eagle's reign isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of something unprecedented. The establishment of a kingdom that will never be destroyed, a reign of justice that will never be corrupted, a time when the earth will finally know peace. But before we can explore those promises, we need to understand exactly what Ezra saw about the final days of this world system. We need to decode the symbols he recorded, interpret the timeline he was given, and recognize the signs he was told to watch for. Because what Ezra witnessed in his vision wasn't just the rise and fall of earthly kingdoms, it was a detailed blueprint of how the final chapter of human history would unfold. And the more you understand the intricate details he recorded, the more you'll realize why this prophecy had to be buried. The vision begins with Ezra seeing this massive eagle emerging from the depths of the sea. But this isn't just any body of water. In biblical symbolism, the sea represents the nations, the peoples, the chaotic masses from which world powers arise. So when this eagle rises from the sea, it's emerging from the collective will and support of the people themselves. Think about that for a moment. This final world empire doesn't impose itself through conquest alone. It rises because the people want it to rise. They welcome it. They see it as their salvation, their protector, their hope for peace and prosperity. The eagle spreads its wings over the entire earth, and Ezra watches as it establishes dominion over every nation, every tribe, every people group. No corner of the globe escapes its influence. Its economic system becomes the world's economic system. Its military power becomes the enforcer of global order. Its cultural values become the standard by which all other cultures are measured. But here's where the prophecy becomes truly specific. Ezra sees 12 wings on this eagle, and each wing represents a distinct phase of power within this empire. The wings don't all appear at once. They emerge in sequence, each one ruling for its appointed time before being succeeded by the next. Some wings, Ezra observes, are larger and rule for longer periods. Others are smaller, representing shorter phases of power. But each wing has its role to play in the overall timeline that leads to the final judgment. Now here's what has modern interpreters of this prophecy absolutely captivated. If you map out the sequence of American presidencies and compare them to Ezra's description of the 12 wings, the parallels are striking. The timing, the characteristics, the sequence of events seem to align in ways that are difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. But the prophecy doesn't stop with the 12 wings. After these wings have completed their appointed times, Ezra sees 3 heads appearing on the eagle. These heads are different from the wings. They're more powerful, more ruthless, more determined to maintain control at any cost. The first head devours the other 2 wings that remain. The second head then devours the first head. And finally, the third head devours the second head. It's a vision of internal power struggle so intense that the empire literally consumes itself from within. The symbolism here is devastating. The The wings represent the normal constitutional transfer of power that characterizes the empire in its earlier phases. But the heads represent something different. Authoritarian power, the abandonment of democratic processes, the rise of leaders who will do anything to maintain control. And according to Ezra's timeline, we're approaching the time when the wings give way to the heads, when constitutional government gives way to authoritarian rule, when the empire enters its final, most dangerous phase. But here's what makes this prophecy particularly relevant to our current moment. Ezra doesn't just see the political transformation of this empire, he sees the spiritual condition of its people during these final days. The prophet describes a generation that has lost its connection to divine truth. People who have access to more religious information than any previous generation, yet remain spiritually starved. Churches that multiply in number while genuine spiritual power diminishes. Religious leaders who speak eloquently about God while demonstrating no evidence of actually knowing Him. This isn't just a political prophecy, it's a spiritual diagnosis, a precise description of what happens when a civilization loses its soul while maintaining its religious facade. Ezra sees people going through the motions of faith, while their hearts remain untouched by divine presence. He witnesses religious institutions that have become so focused on maintaining their power and influence that they've forgotten their original purpose. He observes believers who have been so conditioned to accept substitutes for genuine spiritual experience that they no longer recognize the real thing when they encounter it. Does this sound like the spiritual landscape of modern America? Churches on every corner, yet widespread spiritual emptiness. Religious programming filling the airwaves, yet authentic encounters with the divine becoming increasingly rare. Theological education producing scholars who can debate doctrine but can't demonstrate the power of God. The prophecy suggests that this spiritual condition isn't accidental. It's part of the divine plan. The empire must be revealed for what it truly is before it can be judged. The contrast between its claims and its reality must become so obvious that even the most deceived can no longer ignore the truth. But Ezra's vision goes even deeper into the characteristics of this final empire. He sees a nation that becomes increasingly divided against itself. Not just political division, but moral, cultural, and spiritual division that tears at the very fabric of society. The prophecy describes a time when truth becomes relative, when each group believes its own version of reality, when common ground disappears and people can no longer even agree on basic facts. Sound familiar? Ezra witnesses the breakdown of trust in institutions. Government, media, education, even religious organizations lose their credibility as people discover the gap between their public claims and their private actions. The empire's strength, which once came from unity of purpose and shared values, crumbles as that unity dissolves. The prophet sees economic inequality reaching levels that threaten social stability. A small elite accumulating vast wealth while the majority struggle to meet basic needs. The very prosperity that once made the empire attractive to the world becomes concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. But perhaps most disturbing of all, Ezra sees the empire's moral foundation eroding. Values that once seemed permanent and unshakable begin to shift. Standards that previous generations took for granted become subjects of debate. The moral compass that once guided the nation starts spinning wildly as competing worldviews battle for dominance. This isn't just social change. According to the prophecy, this is divine judgment. The empire is being allowed to reveal its true nature, to strip away the facades and pretenses that have hidden its corruption from view. And as this process accelerates, Ezra sees the people of the empire responding in different ways. Some become angry and bitter, lashing out at anyone they can blame for their circumstances. Others become numb and apathetic, withdrawing from civic life and focusing only on personal survival. Still others become desperate for strong leadership, even if that leadership comes at the cost of their freedom. It's in this context of social breakdown and spiritual emptiness that the three heads appear. Leaders who promise to restore order, to make the empire great again, to return to the values and strength that once defined the nation. But the prophecy reveals that these heads are not saviors. They're part of the judgment. Their rise to power represents the final phase of the empire's corruption, not its redemption. The first head gains power by promising to fix everything that's wrong with the system. But instead of healing the nation's divisions, this head deepens them. Instead of restoring trust in institutions, this head destroys what little trust remains. Instead of bringing people together, this head drives them further apart. The second head emerges from the chaos created by the first, promising even more dramatic solutions. But this head's methods are more extreme, more authoritarian, more willing to sacrifice freedom for the promise of security. And the third head, the final head, represents the ultimate expression of human pride and rebellion against divine authority. This head doesn't just want to control the empire, this head wants to be worshipped as a god. But here's where Ezra's prophecy takes a dramatic turn. Just when it seems like this final head has achieved total domination, just when hope seems lost and the empire's corruption appears complete, something unexpected happens. The Lion of Judah appears, not as a political candidate or a military commander, but as a divine judge, the one who has been watching this entire drama unfold from beginning to end. The one who allowed the eagle to rise so that its true nature could be fully revealed. The one who permitted the corruption to reach its climax so that the judgment would be absolutely justified. And when this lion speaks, the entire system collapses. Not through military conquest or political revolution, but through the power of divine truth. The lies that held the empire together are exposed. The deceptions that kept people in bondage are revealed. The facades that hid the corruption crumble. Ezra watches as the eagle and all its wings and heads are consumed by fire. Not literal fire, but the fire of divine judgment that burns away everything false and leaves only what is true and eternal. This is why the prophecy was banned. This is why religious authorities didn't want ordinary believers reading this vision. Because it suggests that all human systems, including religious systems, will be judged. That institutional authority, whether political or ecclesiastical, is temporary and will be held accountable for how it used its power. The prophecy implies that God doesn't need human institutions to accomplish his purposes. That divine truth can work outside and even against established religious and political structures. that the kingdom of heaven operates by different principles than the kingdoms of this world. But the vision doesn't end with destruction. After the eagle is judged and removed, Ezra sees something beautiful emerging. A new order based on justice rather than power. A kingdom where the oppressed are lifted up and the oppressors are brought low. A reign where truth prevails over deception and love conquers hate. This isn't just wishful thinking or religious fantasy. According to the prophecy, this transformation is as certain as the judgment that precedes it. The same divine authority that allows the eagle to rise also ensures that it will fall. The same power that permits the corruption also guarantees the restoration. And here's what makes this prophecy particularly relevant to those living in our time. If we really are witnessing the final phases of the eagle's reign, if we really are seeing the emergence of the three heads, if we really are living in the days that Ezra foresaw, then we're also approaching the time when the Lion of Judah will appear. The question that confronts every person who encounters this prophecy is this: which side of this divine judgment do you want to be on? Are you going to continue supporting systems that the prophecy says are doomed to fail? Or are you going to align yourself with the kingdom that the prophecy says will never be destroyed? But to make that choice wisely, you need to understand more than just the political dimensions of Ezra's vision. You need to explore the spiritual principles that govern this entire process. You need to discover what the prophecy reveals about the nature of divine justice and how it operates in human history. You need to understand why this vision was considered so dangerous that it had to be hidden from ordinary believers. What truths about the nature of power, the role of institutions, and the destiny of nations were religious authorities afraid people would discover? Most importantly, you need to explore what this prophecy suggests about your own role in these final events. Because according to Ezra's vision, the people living during the time of judgment aren't just passive observers. They're active participants whose choices help determine how the drama unfolds. The forbidden prophecy of Ezra isn't just about predicting the future. It's about understanding the present and choosing wisely how to respond to the times in which we live. But what makes this prophecy truly explosive isn't just its political predictions. It's what Ezra reveals about the spiritual warfare happening behind the scenes of these earthly events. The vision shows that the rise and fall of the eagle isn't just about human politics or economics. It's about a cosmic battle between divine justice and demonic deception that's been raging since the beginning of time. Ezra describes seeing spiritual forces operating through earthly rulers, powers, and principalities that most people never recognize because they're so focused on the visible drama playing out on the political stage. The prophet witnesses how these dark forces use human pride, greed, and fear to manipulate entire populations into supporting systems that ultimately serve evil purposes. Think about this for a moment. What if the political divisions tearing our nation apart aren't really about policy differences? What if they're manifestations of a spiritual war that's reaching its climax? What if the anger, hatred, and violence we see escalating around us are symptoms of demonic influence that's growing stronger as we approach the final judgment? The prophecy suggests that as the eagle enters its final phase, these spiritual forces become more desperate and more visible. The masks come off, the pretenses fall away. The corruption that was once hidden in shadows gets exposed in broad daylight because the powers of darkness know their time is running out. Ezra sees this exposure happening in waves. First, the people lose faith in their media, discovering that the information they've been receiving is deliberately manipulated to serve hidden agendas. Then they lose faith in their educational institutions, realizing that what they've been taught as objective truth is actually ideological programming designed to shape their thinking in specific directions. Next comes the loss of faith in government institutions. People begin to understand that the democratic processes they believed in are largely theatrical, that real power operates through networks and systems that remain hidden from public view. The agencies that were supposed to protect them are revealed to be protecting their own interests instead. But perhaps most devastating of all, people begin to lose faith in their religious institutions. They discover that many of the leaders they trusted to guide them spiritually have been more concerned with maintaining their own power and influence than with serving God or helping people grow in genuine faith. This isn't just institutional failure. According to Ezra's prophecy, this is divine revelation. God is allowing the corruption to be exposed so that people can see clearly what they've really been supporting, what they've really been trusting, what they've really been worshiping. The prophet describes this process as incredibly painful for those who have built their identity around these institutions. When your entire worldview collapses, when everything you believed about your country, your church, your leaders turns out to be based on lies and deceptions, the psychological trauma can be overwhelming. Ezra sees people responding to this revelation in dramatically different ways. Some become angry and seek revenge against those who deceived them. Others become depressed and withdraw from society entirely. Still others become desperate for new authority figures to tell them what to believe and how to live. But the prophecy also describes a different response. A group of people who use this time of exposure and collapse as an opportunity for spiritual awakening. Instead of looking for new human authorities to follow, they begin seeking direct relationship with divine truth. Instead of trying to reform corrupt institutions, they begin building alternative communities based on different principles. These people, according to Ezra's vision, recognize that the judgment falling on earthly systems isn't something to fear, but something to welcome. They understand that corruption must be exposed before healing can begin. They see the collapse of false authorities as necessary preparation for the establishment of true authority. The prophecy describes these awakened individuals as having learned to distinguish between the kingdom of this world and the kingdom of heaven. They are no longer deceived by religious performances that lack genuine spiritual power. They're no longer impressed by political promises that serve hidden agendas. They're no longer satisfied with substitutes for authentic encounters with the divine. But here's what makes this particularly relevant to our current situation. Ezra's vision suggests that this spiritual awakening doesn't happen gradually over centuries. It happens rapidly, in a compressed time frame, as external events force people to confront truths they've been avoiding. The prophet sees this acceleration of spiritual understanding coinciding with the final phases of the eagle's reign. As the political and economic systems become more obviously corrupt, as the deceptions become more blatant, as the contradictions become more impossible to ignore, people are forced to choose between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths. This choice, according to the prophecy, becomes the defining issue of the final days. Not your political affiliation, not your religious denomination, not your economic status, but your willingness to embrace divine truth even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Ezra describes seeing people who choose truth being persecuted by those who prefer deception. Families divided, friendships destroyed, communities torn apart as the spiritual awakening exposes the depth of corruption that has infected every level of society. But the prophet also sees something beautiful emerging from this chaos. Communities of people who have been purified by their willingness to face hard truths. Individuals who have developed the spiritual discernment to recognize divine guidance even when it comes through unexpected channels. Families who have learned to base their relationships on authentic love rather than shared illusions. These purified communities, according to the vision, become the foundation for what emerges after the eagle's judgment. They're the ones who carry forward the values and principles that will characterize the new kingdom. They're the bridge between the corrupt age that's ending and the righteous age that's beginning. But the prophecy makes clear that this purification process isn't optional for those who want to participate in what's coming. You can't carry the corruption of the old system into the new kingdom. You can't maintain loyalty to institutions that God is judging and expect to escape that judgment yourself. This is why the vision was considered so dangerous by religious authorities. It suggests that God's judgment extends to religious institutions that have compromised their mission. That divine authority operates independently of human religious hierarchies. That salvation requires personal spiritual transformation, not just institutional membership. The prophecy describes religious leaders who become furious when people begin seeking direct relationship with God instead of depending on clerical mediation. Church authorities who condemn as heretical any spiritual experience that doesn't conform to their doctrinal frameworks. Denominational leaders who are more concerned with preserving their institutional power than with helping people encounter genuine divine presence. But Ezra also sees religious leaders who respond differently to this time of exposure and judgment. Pastors who acknowledge the ways their institutions have failed and work to restore authentic spiritual community. Priests who choose prophetic truth-telling over comfortable deception. Religious teachers who encourage people to seek personal relationship with God rather than depending solely on human authority. The difference, according to the prophecy, is whether religious leaders see themselves as servants of divine truth or masters of human opinion. Those who genuinely serve God welcome the judgment because they understand it's necessary for purification. Those who serve themselves resist the judgment because they understand it threatens their power. This spiritual dimension of Ezra's prophecy helps explain why the vision was banned from most versions of the Bible. It wasn't just the political predictions that made authorities uncomfortable. It was the suggestion that God's judgment would extend to religious institutions that had lost their way. The prophecy implies that in the final days, divine authority will bypass corrupt religious hierarchies just as surely as it bypasses corrupt political systems. That the Spirit of God will move through unexpected channels, speak through unlikely voices, work through individuals and communities that institutional religion has marginalized or rejected. But here's where the vision becomes even more specific about our current historical moment. Ezra doesn't just see the spiritual awakening happening in general terms. He sees it connected to specific technological developments that allow truth to spread rapidly despite institutional attempts at censorship. The prophet describes a time when information that was once carefully controlled by powerful institutions becomes available to ordinary people. When secrets that were once hidden in closed circles get exposed to public scrutiny. When deceptions that were once protected by official authority get challenged by independent researchers and citizen journalists. Sound familiar? Are we living through the fulfillment of this aspect of Ezra's prophecy right now? The vision suggests that this democratization of information is part of the divine plan for exposing corruption in the final days. That technology that was developed for control and manipulation ends up being used by divine providence to reveal truth and promote spiritual awakening. But the prophecy also warns that this information explosion creates its own challenges when people are suddenly exposed to truths they've never heard before. When they discover that much of what they believed was based on deception, the psychological disorientation can be overwhelming. Ezra sees people struggling to distinguish between authentic revelations and clever counterfeits, between genuine spiritual insights and sophisticated propaganda, between divine truth and human opinion dressed up in religious language. The prophet warns that during this time of information abundance, discernment becomes more important than knowledge. The ability to recognize the voice of God becomes more valuable than the ability to accumulate facts. The capacity for spiritual wisdom becomes more crucial than intellectual intelligence. This is why the prophecy emphasizes the importance of developing direct relationship with divine truth, rather than depending solely on human intermediaries. When information is flowing from so many different sources, when competing authorities are making contradictory claims, when even religious leaders are providing conflicting guidance, you need your own spiritual compass to navigate successfully. But developing this spiritual discernment according to Ezra's vision requires a level of honesty and humility that most people find extremely difficult. It means admitting that you've been deceived about things you were certain were true. It means questioning authorities you've always trusted. It means facing uncomfortable truths about institutions and leaders you've supported. The prophecy suggests that this process of spiritual awakening is so challenging that many people will choose comfortable deception over uncomfortable truth, even when the evidence of corruption becomes overwhelming. They'll continue trusting institutions that have proven themselves untrustworthy. They'll keep following leaders who have demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice truth for power. But for those who do choose the difficult path of spiritual awakening, Ezra's vision contains promises that make the struggle worthwhile. The prophet sees these individuals developing spiritual faculties that allow them to perceive divine guidance directly, growing in wisdom that helps them navigate the chaos of the final days, building communities based on authentic love rather than shared deceptions. Most importantly, the prophecy reveals that these spiritually awakened individuals play a crucial role in what emerges after the judgment. They're not just surviving the collapse of corrupt systems. They're actively participating in the establishment of the righteous kingdom that replaces those systems. But to understand exactly what this means, we need to explore the most mysterious and controversial aspect of Ezra's prophecy: the identity of the Lion of Judah who appears at the climax of the vision to judge the eagle and establish the new kingdom. Who is this figure that Ezra sees emerging to challenge the greatest empire in human history? What does the prophecy reveal about the nature of this final confrontation between earthly power and divine authority? And how does this connect to other biblical prophecies about the end times? The answers to these questions take us into territory that religious authorities have found even more threatening than the political predictions. Because Ezra's description of the Lion of Judah challenges conventional assumptions about how divine intervention works in human history. The prophet doesn't see armies marching or weapons firing. He doesn't witness military conquest or political revolution. Instead, he sees something far more powerful and far more terrifying to those who have built their authority on deception. He sees truth itself becoming a weapon that destroys everything false. He sees divine light exposing every hidden corruption. He sees the power of authentic spiritual authority overwhelming all counterfeit claims to legitimacy. This is judgment by revelation rather than destruction, collapse through exposure rather than conquest. The end of the eagle's reign not because it's defeated in battle, but because it's revealed for what it truly is and people finally see clearly enough to withdraw their support. But who has this kind of spiritual authority? Who possesses the divine power to strip away deceptions that have fooled entire civilizations? Who is this Lion of Judah that Ezra sees emerging to establish a kingdom based on justice rather than power? The answers to these questions reveal why the prophecy of Ezra was considered too dangerous for ordinary believers to read, why religious authorities worked so hard to keep this vision hidden, and why discovering this forbidden text might be the key to understanding not just where we're headed as a civilization, but what role each of us is meant to play in these final events. Because according to Ezra's prophecy, the appearance of the Lion of Judah isn't just something that happens to us, it's something that happens through us. The establishment of the righteous kingdom isn't just something we observe, it's something we participate in creating. But that participation requires a level of spiritual preparation that goes far beyond conventional religious practice. It demands the kind of transformation that can only come through direct encounter with divine truth. It calls for the courage to embrace spiritual authority that operates independently of human institutions. The question that confronts every person who encounters this forbidden prophecy is whether they're ready for that level of spiritual responsibility, whether they're prepared to be part of the solution rather than remaining part of the problem, whether they're willing to pay the price that authentic spiritual awakening requires. because what Ezra witnessed next in his forbidden vision goes beyond anything most people are prepared to confront. The Lion of Judah doesn't appear as the gentle shepherd of Sunday school lessons. This figure emerges as a divine prosecutor, armed with evidence of every crime, every deception, every act of oppression committed by the eagle and its rulers. The prophet describes watching this lion speak, and when it does, its voice carries the weight of absolute truth. Every lie told by the eagle's leaders is exposed. Every secret deal, every hidden agenda, every manipulation of the people is brought into the light. The corruption that thrived in darkness withers under this divine revelation. But here's what makes this vision truly revolutionary. Ezra sees that this judgment doesn't come from outside the system, it emerges from within it. The Lion of Judah doesn't conquer the eagle through military force. Instead, it uses the eagle's own corruption as the instrument of its destruction. Think about what this means for our current moment. If we really are witnessing the final phase of the eagle's reign, then every scandal exposed, every lie revealed, every act of corruption brought to light isn't just random political drama. It's part of a divine process of judgment that's been unfolding according to a predetermined timeline. The prophecy suggests that what looks like chaos and social breakdown is actually divine order manifesting. What appears to be the random exposure of institutional corruption is actually systematic revelation designed to prepare people for what's coming next. Ezra describes seeing people's reactions as this truth-telling accelerates. Some become angry and violent, lashing out at anyone they can blame for their shattered illusions. Others become paralyzed by fear, unable to process the scope of deception they've discovered. Still others retreat into denial, refusing to acknowledge evidence that contradicts their cherished beliefs. But the prophet also sees a different response. A group of people who welcome this exposure because they understand it's necessary preparation for something better. These individuals recognize that corrupt systems must be revealed before they can be replaced. They see the judgment as liberation rather than destruction. According to the vision, these people possess something that allows them to navigate the chaos with wisdom and peace. They've developed what Ezra calls the ability to hear the voice of truth even when it comes through unexpected channels. They can distinguish between authentic revelation and clever deception, because they've learned to test everything against divine standards rather than human opinion. This spiritual discernment becomes crucial as the final phase unfolds. The prophecy warns that as the eagle's reign approaches its end, the deceptions become more sophisticated, the propaganda more persuasive, the counterfeits more convincing. Only those who have developed genuine spiritual discernment can avoid being swept away by the final wave of lies. But Ezra's vision goes deeper into the mechanics of how this judgment actually works. The prophet sees that the Lion of Judah doesn't simply expose the eagle's corruption from the outside. Instead, it works through individuals within the system who choose truth over comfort, justice over security, divine authority over human approval. These truth-tellers, according to the prophecy, become the instruments through which divine judgment manifests. They're not necessarily religious leaders or political figures. Often they're ordinary people who simply refuse to participate in deception any longer. Whistleblowers who risk everything to expose corruption. Journalists who choose truth over career advancement. Citizens who speak up despite threats and intimidation. The vision suggests that as these individuals multiply, as more and more people choose courage over cowardice, the system's ability to maintain its deceptions collapses. The emperor's new clothes are revealed to be nothing at all. And once enough people see the truth, the illusion can no longer be sustained. This is why Ezra's prophecy was considered so dangerous by religious authorities. It doesn't just predict the fall of earthly kingdoms, it reveals that ordinary people empowered by divine truth have the power to bring down the most sophisticated systems of control and manipulation. The vision implies that you don't need to be a political leader or religious authority to participate in this divine judgment. You just need to be willing to choose truth over lies, even when that choice costs you everything you thought you wanted. But the prophecy also contains warnings about the price of this participation. Ezra sees those who choose to serve divine truth facing persecution, ridicule, and rejection from the very institutions they once trusted. They're labeled as troublemakers, conspiracy theorists, dangerous radicals by authorities who benefit from maintaining the status quo. The prophet describes watching families torn apart as some members awaken to truth while others cling to comfortable deceptions. Churches splitting as congregations discover their leaders have been serving institutional interests rather than divine purposes. Communities dividing as hidden corruption gets exposed and people are forced to choose sides. This isn't just social upheaval. According to the vision, this is spiritual warfare manifesting in visible form. The forces of darkness that have operated through deception and manipulation are being challenged by forces of light that work through truth and revelation. Ezra sees this conflict intensifying as the final phase approaches. The stakes become higher, the choices become clearer, the consequences become more severe. Those who serve truth find their spiritual authority increasing. Those who serve deception find their power crumbling. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of the prophecy is how it describes the ultimate fate of the eagle's final leaders. The three heads that represent the last phase of imperial power don't just lose political control. They experience something far more terrifying. The vision shows these final rulers being confronted directly by the Lion of Judah, not in some distant future judgment, but while they're still alive, still in power, still convinced of their own authority. And when they encounter authentic divine presence, their reaction reveals the true nature of their rule. Ezra describes seeing these leaders consumed by terror when faced with genuine spiritual authority. All their wealth, all their power, all their human connections become meaningless in the presence of divine truth. They realize that everything they've built their identity around is nothing more than illusion. The prophet watches as these final rulers attempt to hide from this divine encounter. They retreat into bunkers, surround themselves with security, try to use their remaining power to protect themselves from judgment. But there's no hiding from truth. There's no security system that can keep out divine revelation. This confrontation, according to the prophecy, marks the end of the eagle's reign. Not because these leaders are physically destroyed, but because their authority is spiritually revoked. The people finally see them for what they really are, and once that happens, their power simply evaporates. But Ezra's vision doesn't end with the destruction of the corrupt system. The prophet sees something emerging from the ashes of the eagle's judgment that's more beautiful and more powerful than anything that came before. The Lion of Judah doesn't just tear down the old order, it establishes a new one based on completely different principles. Instead of power serving itself, power serves justice. Instead of wealth being concentrated in few hands, abundance flows to those who need it most. Instead of truth being manipulated by authorities, truth becomes the foundation of all governance. This isn't utopian fantasy according to the prophecy. This is the inevitable result of removing corruption from human systems. When lies are replaced by truth, when selfishness is replaced by service, when fear is replaced by love, the natural result is a society that actually works for everyone rather than just the elite. The vision describes people who have been purified by their willingness to choose truth over comfort, becoming the leaders of this new order. Not because they sought power, but because their spiritual authority has been proven through their faithfulness during the time of testing. These leaders, according to Ezra's prophecy, govern not through force or manipulation, but through wisdom and genuine care for those they serve. They understand that true authority comes from divine appointment, not human ambition. They know that their role is to serve others, not to be served by them. But the prophecy makes clear that this transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires active participation from people who are willing to embrace the spiritual principles that make righteous governance possible. It demands individuals who have learned to distinguish between serving God and serving themselves. This is where Ezra's vision becomes personally challenging for everyone who encounters it. The prophecy suggests that your response to the current exposure of corruption determines your role in what comes next. If you choose comfortable deception over uncomfortable truth, you align yourself with the system being judged. If you choose divine truth over human opinion, you participate in establishing the righteous alternative. The vision reveals that this choice isn't just about political preferences or religious beliefs. It's about fundamental spiritual orientation. Are you committed to truth regardless of personal cost? Are you willing to serve justice even when it's inconvenient? Are you prepared to submit to divine authority even when human authorities oppose it? According to the prophecy, these questions become the defining issues of the final days. Not your denomination, not your political party, not your social status, but your willingness to choose God's kingdom over human kingdoms, divine truth over institutional doctrine, spiritual reality over comfortable illusion. But Ezra's vision also reveals something that makes this choice both more difficult and more urgent. The prophet sees that time is running out. The sequence of events he witnessed has a definite endpoint. The eagle's reign doesn't continue indefinitely. The final judgment arrives according to a predetermined schedule. This creates what the prophecy describes as a window of opportunity for spiritual awakening and transformation. People who recognize what's happening can still choose to align themselves with divine truth. Communities can still repent of their participation in corrupt systems. Institutions can still reform themselves before judgment becomes final, but this window doesn't remain open forever. Ezra sees it closing as the final phase of the eagle's reign approaches completion. At some point, the choices become irreversible. The sides become fixed. The judgment becomes inevitable. The vision suggests we're approaching that point now. The corruption is being exposed faster than ever before. The deceptions are becoming more obvious. The contradictions are becoming impossible to ignore. The choice between truth and lies is becoming unavoidable. This is why discovering the forbidden prophecy of Ezra matters so much right now. It's not just historical curiosity or religious speculation. It's a roadmap for understanding what's happening around us and wisdom for navigating the choices we face. The prophet's vision offers hope to those who feel overwhelmed by the scale of corruption they're discovering. It provides perspective to those who wonder if truth will ever prevail over deception. It gives purpose to those who want to be part of the solution rather than remaining part of the problem. But the prophecy also contains warnings that can't be ignored. Ezra sees that choosing truth over lies comes with a price. Standing for justice over convenience requires sacrifice. Serving divine purposes rather than human ambitions demands total commitment. The vision reveals that lukewarm responses don't work during times of divine judgment. You can't serve both the kingdom of truth and the empire of deception. You can't maintain loyalty to corrupt systems while claiming to follow righteous principles. You can't stay neutral when spiritual warfare is manifesting all around you. This is the ultimate challenge that Ezra's forbidden prophecy presents to our generation. Are we willing to pay the price that spiritual awakening requires? Are we prepared to choose divine truth over human comfort? Are we ready to participate in establishing God's kingdom rather than just hoping someone else will do it for us? The prophecy suggests that how we answer these questions determines not just our personal destiny, but the destiny of civilization itself. Because according to Ezra's vision, the people living during the time of judgment aren't just observers of divine intervention, they're participants in divine purpose. The Lion of Judah doesn't establish the righteous kingdom without human cooperation. Divine truth doesn't triumph over deception without people choosing to embrace and proclaim it. Justice doesn't replace corruption without individuals willing to serve truth regardless of personal cost. But for those who do make that choice, who do pay that price, who do align themselves with divine purpose, the prophecy contains promises that make every sacrifice worthwhile. Ezra sees these faithful individuals not just surviving the judgment, but thriving in what emerges from it. They become the foundation of a new civilization based on principles that actually work. They experience the joy of seeing truth triumph over lies, justice prevail over oppression, love conquer fear. They participate in creating a world where corruption is impossible because transparency is absolute, where oppression is unthinkable because service is the highest honor, where deception is unnecessary because truth sets everyone free. This is the vision that religious authorities found too dangerous to share. This is the hope they were afraid people would discover. This is the future they didn't want believers to anticipate because it would make them dissatisfied with corrupt present realities. But the vision survived despite their attempts at suppression. The prophecy emerged from its forbidden status just when it was needed most. The truth they tried to bury has resurfaced at precisely the moment when people most need to understand what's happening and why. The question that remains is what you're going to do with this knowledge. Now that you've encountered Ezra's forbidden vision, now that you understand the choice it presents, now that you see the role you're invited to play, what's your response going to be? Because according to the prophecy, neutrality isn't an option. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. The truth has been revealed. The choice has been presented. The time for decision has arrived. The eagle's reign is ending exactly as Ezra foretold. The Lion of Judah is emerging exactly as the prophet witnessed. The final judgment is approaching exactly as the vision revealed. The only question left is which side of that judgment you're going to be on when it arrives. And that choice, according to the forbidden prophecy of Ezra, is yours to make right now. The implications of what we've uncovered go far deeper than most people realize, because hidden within Ezra's forbidden vision lies something that challenges not just our understanding of the end times, but our entire conception of how divine prophecy actually works in human history. You see, most people think of biblical prophecy as simple prediction. God reveals the future, prophets write it down, and then we wait to see if it comes true. But Ezra's vision operates on a completely different level. This isn't just prediction. This is what scholars call prophetic programming. A divine blueprint that doesn't just describe what will happen, but actually participates in making it happen. Silomet, think about the psychological power of a prophecy that has circulated for nearly 2,000 years. Even if most people haven't read it directly, the symbols and images it contains have seeped into our collective consciousness. The eagle as a symbol of empire, the wings representing phases of power, the head symbolizing final authoritarian control. These aren't just ancient metaphors, they've become archetypal patterns that shape how we interpret current events. But here's where it gets truly mind-bending. What if Ezra's prophecy wasn't just describing a future he witnessed in vision? What if he was downloading a divine program that would actually guide the unfolding of history itself? What if the very act of recording this vision set in motion the spiritual forces that would ensure its fulfillment? This concept terrifies religious authorities because it suggests that prophecy isn't just passive prediction. It's active creation. The words spoken by true prophets don't just describe reality, they help create reality. They establish spiritual patterns that subsequent events follow, almost as if history itself is being written according to a script that was composed in the heavenly realm. And if that's true, then understanding Ezra's prophecy isn't just about satisfying intellectual curiosity. It's about recognizing the spiritual program that's currently running in our world, the divine code that's orchestrating events behind the scenes, the celestial algorithm that's guiding us toward the final confrontation between earthly power and heavenly authority. The prophecy reveals that this program operates through what Ezra calls appointed times. Specific moments when certain events must occur according to the divine timeline. These aren't arbitrary dates chosen by human planners. They're cosmic coordinates built into the fabric of reality itself. Ezra describes seeing these appointed times marked by celestial signs, astronomical events that serve as divine timestamps. confirming that the prophetic program is unfolding exactly as scheduled. Solar eclipses, lunar anomalies, planetary alignments that occur at precisely the moments when major transitions in the eagle's reign take place. Now, before you dismiss this as ancient astrology, consider how many significant political events in recent years have coincided with unusual celestial phenomena. How many times have major announcements, surprising elections, or shocking revelations occurred during eclipse seasons or other astronomical events? The prophecy suggests this isn't coincidence. It's confirmation that we're living inside a divine program that coordinates earthly events with heavenly signs. A cosmic operating system that ensures spiritual realities manifest through physical circumstances according to predetermined timing. But here's what makes this particularly relevant to our current moment. Ezra's vision reveals that as the program approaches its completion, the synchronicities become more obvious. The connections between spiritual patterns and physical events become harder to ignore. The divine fingerprints on human history become visible to anyone with eyes to see. The prophet describes this acceleration as a time when the veil between the spiritual and physical realms becomes increasingly thin, when supernatural realities begin breaking through into ordinary experience, when people who never considered themselves particularly spiritual start having dreams, visions, and intuitive insights about what's coming. This spiritual awakening isn't random according to the prophecy. It's programmed into the divine code. As the final phase approaches, more and more people are activated to play their roles in the unfolding drama. Some are called to expose corruption, others are called to preserve truth. Still others are called to prepare communities for what comes after the judgment. But the vision also warns that counterfeit spiritual experiences multiply during this same period. As genuine divine revelation increases, so do sophisticated deceptions designed to confuse and misdirect those who are beginning to awaken. The enemy, knowing his time is short, unleashes every weapon in his arsenal to prevent people from recognizing their true purpose. Ezra describes seeing false prophets arise who perform impressive signs and wonders but lead people away from divine truth. Religious movements that use spiritual language but serve earthly agendas. Political leaders who claim divine mandate but demonstrate demonic character. The counterfeits become so convincing that even spiritually mature people struggle to distinguish between authentic and artificial revelation. This is why the prophecy emphasizes the importance of testing every spirit, examining every message, verifying every claim against the unchanging standards of divine truth. Just because something appears supernatural doesn't mean it's from God. Just because someone quotes scripture doesn't mean they're serving divine purposes. Just because a movement uses religious terminology doesn't mean it's aligned with heavenly values. The vision reveals specific criteria for distinguishing between authentic divine revelation and clever counterfeits. True prophecy always points people toward personal relationship with God rather than dependence on human mediators. Genuine spiritual authority serves others rather than seeking to be served. Authentic divine power produces humility in those who exercise it rather than pride and arrogance. But perhaps most importantly, real prophetic revelation always aligns with the moral character revealed in Scripture. It promotes love, truth, justice, and mercy. It opposes oppression, deception, exploitation, and cruelty. It serves the interests of the weak and vulnerable rather than the powerful and privileged. Using these criteria, Ezra's prophecy encourages people to evaluate not just religious teachers, but political leaders, media figures, and cultural influencers. Anyone claiming authority over others must be measured against divine standards rather than human charisma or worldly success. The prophet warns that many who appear successful by earthly standards are actually spiritual failures. Leaders who accumulate wealth and power while their followers suffer. Teachers who build impressive ministries while demonstrating no evidence of divine presence in their personal lives. Politicians who make eloquent speeches about justice while participating in systems of oppression. But the vision also reveals that many who appear insignificant by worldly standards are actually spiritual giants. Ordinary people who choose truth over comfort. Unknown individuals who serve others without seeking recognition. Humble servants who demonstrate divine character even when no one is watching. According to the prophecy, these hidden saints play crucial roles in the divine program. They're the ones who maintain spiritual authenticity when religious institutions become corrupt. They're the ones who preserve truth when official authorities promote deception. They're the ones who demonstrate what genuine faith looks like when it's been forgotten by those who claim to represent it. Ezra describes seeing these faithful individuals scattered throughout every nation, every culture, every religious tradition. They don't necessarily know each other personally, but they're connected by their shared commitment to divine truth. They form what the prophet calls an invisible network of light that operates parallel to visible power structures. This network becomes increasingly important as the final phase unfolds. When official institutions fail, when traditional authorities prove unreliable, when established systems collapse, these hidden servants provide stability and guidance for those seeking truth. They become safe harbors in the storm, beacons of hope in the darkness, living demonstrations that divine presence remains accessible even when everything else seems to be falling apart. But the prophecy reveals that this invisible network doesn't remain hidden forever. As the eagle's reign approaches its climax, as the corruption becomes undeniable, as the need for authentic spiritual leadership becomes desperate, these hidden servants begin to emerge into visibility. Not because they seek recognition or power, but because the divine program requires their gifts to be available to those who need them. The time of preparation ends and the time of manifestation begins. The season of hiddenness gives way to the season of revelation. Ezra describes watching this emergence happen in waves. First, a few individuals begin speaking truth with unusual authority and clarity. Their words carry spiritual power that penetrates deception and awakens dormant consciences. People who hear them recognize something they've been longing for without knowing what it was. Then, as these initial truth speakers gain credibility through the accuracy of their insights and the authenticity of their character, others begin joining them. Not in organized movements or institutional structures, but in organic networks based on shared commitment to divine truth and mutual recognition of spiritual authority. The prophet sees these networks growing rapidly as external circumstances force people to choose between comfort and truth. between institutional loyalty and spiritual integrity, between human approval and divine calling. Those who choose truth find each other naturally, drawn together by spiritual resonance that transcends denominational, cultural, and political boundaries. But the vision also warns that this emergence of authentic spiritual authority triggers intense opposition from those whose power depends on maintaining deception. Religious institutions that have invested their identity in controlling spiritual experience. Political systems that require public ignorance to maintain legitimacy. Economic structures that profit from keeping people confused and divided. The prophecy describes this opposition as becoming increasingly desperate and violent as the invisible network becomes more visible and influential. Those who serve the kingdom of lies recognize the existential threat posed by the kingdom of truth. They understand that their entire system of control depends on preventing people from accessing direct spiritual authority. Ezra sees this conflict manifesting through censorship, persecution, economic pressure, social ostracism, and eventually physical violence against those who refuse to conform to official narratives. The servants of truth face the same opposition that prophets have always encountered, but intensified because the stakes are higher and the time is shorter. Yet the vision reveals that this persecution actually accelerates the divine program rather than hindering it. Every attempt to suppress truth only makes it more obvious and attractive to those who are spiritually hungry. Every act of persecution reveals more clearly which side serves justice and which side serves oppression. The prophet describes watching the invisible network grow stronger under pressure, like muscle being developed through resistance training. The persecution purifies the movement by driving away those who aren't fully committed while strengthening the resolve of those who are genuinely called. This process of purification through persecution becomes one of the defining characteristics of the final phase. Not everyone who claims to serve truth actually does. Not everyone who uses spiritual language is actually spiritual. Not everyone who opposes corruption is actually pure themselves. The pressure of persecution reveals who is authentic and who is pretending, who serves divine purposes and who serves their own agenda, who is willing to sacrifice everything for truth, and who wants the benefits of righteousness without paying its price. Ezra's vision shows this winnowing process as both painful and necessary. Painful because it involves the exposure of deception within the ranks of those claiming to serve God. Necessary because the divine program cannot succeed with compromised leadership or half-hearted commitment. The prophet sees religious movements splitting as some members choose institutional loyalty while others choose spiritual authenticity. Families dividing as some relatives cling to comfortable lies while others embrace uncomfortable truth. Communities fragmenting as hidden corruption gets exposed and people are forced to take sides. But from this apparent chaos, something beautiful emerges. Those who pass through the fire of persecution and purification develop a level of spiritual authority and clarity that becomes unmistakable to anyone with spiritual sensitivity. They carry presence that transforms atmospheres. They speak truth that penetrates hearts. They demonstrate love that heals wounds. These purified servants become the foundation stones of what Ezra sees emerging after the eagle's judgment. not a reformed version of the old system, but something entirely new. A civilization based on principles that actually work because they align with divine design rather than human ambition. The prophecy describes this new order as characterized by transparency instead of deception, service instead of domination, abundance instead of scarcity, cooperation instead of competition. Not because human nature has changed, but because the systems that rewarded selfish behavior have been replaced by systems that reward selfless service. But the vision makes clear that this transformation doesn't happen automatically or universally. It emerges only in communities where enough people have been spiritually purified to sustain it, where the commitment to truth is strong enough to resist the temptation to return to familiar patterns of corruption. This is why the divine program includes such an intensive purification process. The new wine of righteous civilization cannot be contained in the old wineskins of corrupt human systems. New structures require new consciousness. New forms of governance require new forms of character. Ezra describes seeing these purified communities serving as demonstration projects for the rest of humanity, living examples of what becomes possible when people organize their lives around divine principles rather than human pride. Proof that the kingdom of heaven isn't just a future hope, but a present possibility. The prophet watches as these communities attract others who are tired of the chaos and dysfunction of corrupt systems. People who have lost faith in traditional institutions but haven't lost faith in the possibility of something better. Individuals who recognize authentic spiritual authority when they encounter it. But the vision also reveals that not everyone is ready for this level of transformation. Many people, even when presented with clear alternatives to corruption, choose to remain in familiar dysfunction rather than embrace unfamiliar healing. They prefer the devil they know to the God they don't understand. This creates what Ezra describes as a great separation. Not a physical division, but a spiritual one. Those who choose divine truth naturally gravitate toward communities where truth is honored. Those who prefer comfortable deception remain in systems that tell them what they want to hear, rather than what they need to know. The prophecy suggests this separation accelerates as the final phase progresses. The contrast between the two approaches to life becomes so obvious that neutrality becomes impossible. Everyone must choose whether they want to participate in building the kingdom of truth or remain trapped in the empire of lies. But here's what makes Ezra's vision particularly challenging for our generation. The prophet reveals that this choice isn't made once and then forgotten. It's a daily decision that must be renewed continuously as circumstances change and pressures intensify. Each day brings new opportunities to choose truth over lies, service over selfishness, divine authority over human opinion. Each situation presents the question: will you align yourself with the kingdom that's being established, or remain loyal to the empire that's being judged? The vision shows that these daily choices accumulate into spiritual momentum that eventually becomes irreversible. Those who consistently choose truth develop such strong spiritual foundations that they cannot be shaken by external circumstances. Those who repeatedly choose deception become so invested in false narratives that they cannot accept evidence that contradicts their illusions. This is why Ezra's prophecy emphasizes the urgency of choosing correctly while choice is still possible. The window of opportunity for spiritual transformation doesn't remain open indefinitely. At some point, the patterns become fixed, the sides become established, the judgment becomes final. The prophet sees this moment of final decision approaching as the eagle enters its death throes, and the Lion of Judah prepares to establish permanent authority. Those who have aligned themselves with divine truth welcome this transition as liberation. Those who have remained loyal to human systems experience it as devastation. But even in judgment, the vision reveals divine mercy. Ezra sees opportunities for repentance continuing until the very last moment. Chances for people to recognize their error and choose differently. Invitations for communities to acknowledge their corruption and seek purification. The prophecy makes clear that divine judgment isn't vindictive punishment but corrective discipline. Its purpose isn't to destroy but to restore. Its goal isn't revenge but redemption. Even the harshest judgments serve the ultimate purpose of creating space for something better to emerge. This is why understanding Ezra's forbidden vision matters so much for our current historical moment. It provides context for the chaos we're witnessing, meaning for the suffering we're experiencing, hope for the future we're approaching. The corruption being exposed isn't random scandal, but systematic revelation. The institutions failing aren't unfortunate casualties, but necessary casualties. The systems collapsing aren't tragic accidents, but planned demolitions designed to clear space for righteous alternatives. But the prophecy also makes clear that passive observation isn't enough. Divine programs require human participation. Heavenly purposes need earthly cooperation. The kingdom of truth cannot be established without people willing to serve its principles regardless of personal cost. This is the ultimate challenge that Ezra's vision presents to anyone who encounters it. Are you ready to be part of the solution rather than remaining part of the problem? Are you prepared to align yourself with divine purposes even when human authorities oppose them? Are you willing to serve truth even when lies seem more profitable? The prophecy reveals that how you answer these questions determines not just your personal destiny, but your role in the cosmic drama that's currently unfolding. Because according to Ezra's forbidden vision, every person alive during this time of judgment has been placed here for a purpose. Everyone has a part to play in either advancing divine truth or obstructing it. The question is whether you'll recognize your role and have the courage to fulfill it. Whether you'll embrace the spiritual authority that comes with choosing truth over comfort. Whether you'll pay the price that authentic transformation requires. But for those who do make that choice, who do pay that price, who do align themselves with the divine program that Ezra witnessed, the prophecy contains promises that make every sacrifice worthwhile. They become participants in the most significant transformation in human history. They help establish a civilization that actually works because it's based on principles that align with ultimate reality. They experience the joy of seeing truth triumph over deception, justice prevail over oppression, love conquer fear. They participate in creating a world where the lion lies down with the lamb, not because nature has changed, but because the systems that rewarded predatory behavior have been replaced by systems that reward cooperative service. This is the vision that religious authorities found too dangerous to share. This is the hope they were afraid people would discover. This is the future they didn't want believers to anticipate because it would make them dissatisfied with corrupt present realities and motivated to work for righteous alternatives. But the vision survived their attempts at suppression. The prophecy has emerged from its forbidden status precisely when it's needed most. The truth they tried to bury has resurfaced at the exact moment when people most need to understand what's happening and why. The eagle's wings are being plucked off exactly as Ezra foretold. The three heads are preparing to devour each other exactly as the prophet witnessed. The Lion of Judah is emerging to establish righteous authority exactly as the vision revealed. The divine program is running according to schedule. The appointed times are being fulfilled with precision. The prophetic code is executing flawlessly despite every human attempt to interfere with its operation. The only question that remains is whether you'll recognize what's happening and position yourself correctly for what comes next. Whether you'll align yourself with the kingdom that's being established rather than the empire that's being judged. Whether you'll choose to be part of the greatest transformation in human history rather than remaining trapped in the greatest deception. Because according to Ezra's forbidden prophecy, that choice is yours to make. Right here. Right now. Today. And that choice, the vision reveals, will determine everything that follows. The forbidden vision doesn't end there. Hidden within the deepest layers of Ezra's prophecy lies something even more shocking than political predictions or spiritual warfare. The prophet witnessed what he describes as the final countdown itself. A precise timeline embedded within the symbols that reveals not just what will happen, but when it will happen. You see, most people focus on the eagle and its wings, missing the mathematical precision woven throughout the entire vision. Ezra wasn't just receiving random apocalyptic imagery. He was downloading a divine chronometer, a celestial clock that would tick away the centuries until the final moment arrived. The prophet describes seeing numbers that initially made no sense to him. Measurements of time that seemed impossible to calculate. Sequences of events that appeared to overlap and contradict each other. But when you understand the prophetic mathematics embedded in his vision, when you decode the temporal patterns he recorded, a stunning picture emerges. Think about this. Every major empire in history has followed predictable cycles. Rise, expansion, dominance, decline, collapse. The pattern repeats with mathematical regularity throughout human civilization. But Ezra's prophecy reveals something unprecedented. The final empire doesn't follow the normal cycle. Its timeline is compressed, accelerated, designed to accomplish in decades what previous empires took centuries to complete. The vision shows this acceleration happening in specific phases, each one faster than the last. The early wings represent extended periods of gradual development. The middle wings show rapid expansion and consolidation of power. But the final wings, according to the prophecy, represent periods so compressed that massive changes occur in time frames that seem impossible by historical standards. Now here's where it gets absolutely mind-bending. When you map out the timeline Ezra recorded and compare it to actual historical events, the correlations are so precise they seem almost supernatural. The prophet appears to have witnessed not just the general outline of future history, but the specific dates when crucial transitions would occur. But the religious authorities who suppressed this text understood something that most modern readers miss. The prophecy doesn't just predict when events will happen. It reveals why they must happen at precisely those times. The divine program operates according to celestial mathematics that coordinate earthly events with heavenly purposes. Ezra describes seeing what he calls the appointed seasons, specific windows of time when certain spiritual conditions align to make prophetic fulfillment inevitable. These aren't arbitrary moments chosen by human planners. They're cosmic coordinates built into the fabric of reality itself. Moments when the veil between spiritual and physical realms becomes thin enough for divine intervention to manifest. The prophet witnesses these appointed seasons marked by signs in the heavens, astronomical events that serve as divine timestamps, confirming that the prophetic program is unfolding exactly as scheduled. Solar eclipses that occur at moments of political transition, lunar anomalies that coincide with the exposure of hidden corruption, planetary alignments that herald the emergence of new spiritual authority. But here's what makes this timeline particularly terrifying for those in power. The prophecy reveals that these appointed seasons cannot be delayed, manipulated, or prevented by human effort. When the divine chronometer reaches the predetermined moment, the programmed events must unfold regardless of earthly resistance. The vision shows Ezra watching powerful rulers attempting to interfere with this celestial timeline. Leaders who think they can manipulate circumstances to prevent their own judgment. Religious authorities who believe they can suppress truth indefinitely. Economic systems that assume they can maintain their control through superior planning and resources. But the prophet sees all these human efforts failing spectacularly when they come into conflict with divine timing. The appointed seasons arrive with unstoppable precision. The celestial coordinates activate regardless of earthly opposition. The prophetic program executes its code despite every attempt at interference. This is why the timeline aspects of Ezra's prophecy were considered the most dangerous elements to suppress. Political predictions might be dismissed as speculation. Spiritual warnings could be explained as metaphor. But mathematical precision in prophetic fulfillment suggests something far more unsettling. That history itself operates according to a divine algorithm that human beings can observe but cannot alter. The prophet describes receiving detailed instructions about how to recognize these appointed seasons as they approach. Specific signs that would appear in the natural world, in human society, and spiritual atmospheres. Warning signals that would give discerning observers advance notice of what was coming. But Ezra also receives sobering information about the acceleration factor built into the final timeline. The closer the prophecy gets to its climax, the faster events unfold. What once took generations to accomplish begins happening in years. What once required years starts occurring in months. What once needed months begins manifesting in days. The vision reveals this acceleration serving multiple divine purposes. First, it prevents the forces of corruption from adapting their strategies to counter prophetic fulfillment. They don't have time to develop effective responses because events move too quickly. Second, it minimizes the suffering of those who choose truth by shortening the period of tribulation they must endure. Third, it maximizes the shock value of divine intervention by compressing miraculous events into time frames that make their supernatural origin undeniable. But perhaps most importantly, the accelerated timeline serves as a test of spiritual readiness. Those who have developed genuine discernment can recognize the signs and respond appropriately even when events unfold rapidly. Those who depend on human analysis and institutional guidance find themselves overwhelmed by the pace of change and unable to adapt quickly enough to avoid judgment. Ezra describes watching this acceleration create what he calls the Great Sorting. People and institutions that appeared similar during times of gradual change reveal their true nature when forced to respond rapidly to unprecedented circumstances. The pressure of accelerated events strips away pretenses and exposes authentic character. The prophecy shows religious leaders who seemed pious and humble when they had time to craft careful responses, revealing their actual priorities when forced to make quick decisions under pressure. Political figures who appeared principled and patriotic, demonstrating their real loyalties when circumstances demand immediate choices between competing values. This sorting process, according to the vision, intensifies as the timeline approaches its climax. The masks come off faster. The pretenses become harder to maintain. The contradictions between public image and private reality become impossible to hide. When events move too quickly for careful image management. But the prophet also sees something beautiful emerging from this intense pressure. Individuals who have built their lives on genuine spiritual foundations discover they can navigate rapid change with wisdom and peace. Communities that have prioritized truth over comfort find they can adapt to new circumstances without losing their essential character. These authentic servants, according to Ezra's timeline, become increasingly valuable as events accelerate beyond the ability of conventional wisdom to comprehend. Their spiritual discernment allows them to recognize divine purposes even when circumstances seem chaotic. Their connection to heavenly truth enables them to provide guidance when earthly authorities prove inadequate. The vision reveals these prepared servants playing crucial roles in the final phases of the prophetic timeline, not as leaders seeking power or recognition, but as spiritual anchors helping others navigate the turbulence of accelerated change. They become safe harbors in the storm, beacons of hope in the confusion, living demonstrations that divine presence remains accessible even when everything else seems to be moving too fast to understand. But Ezra's timeline also contains warnings about the specific challenges that this acceleration creates. The prophet sees people becoming overwhelmed by the pace of revelation, unable to process the amount of corruption being exposed in compressed time frames. Information overload that paralyzes rather than liberates. Truth bombardment that creates confusion rather than clarity. The vision shows some individuals shutting down emotionally when confronted with too much disturbing information too quickly. Others becoming addicted to shocking revelations, losing the ability to function normally because they're constantly seeking the next dramatic disclosure. Still others developing conspiracy paranoia, seeing hidden agendas in every circumstance because the genuine conspiracies they've discovered make everything seem suspicious. According to the prophecy, these psychological casualties of accelerated revelation become tragic obstacles to their own spiritual development. They possess access to truth but lack the emotional stability to use it wisely. They recognize corruption but cannot maintain the inner peace necessary for effective response. This is why Ezra's timeline emphasizes the importance of spiritual preparation before the acceleration begins. Those who have developed strong foundations of faith, hope, and love can handle rapid exposure to disturbing truths without losing their equilibrium. Those who have learned to find their security in divine presence rather than human institutions can navigate institutional collapse without losing their purpose. But the prophet warns that this preparation cannot be developed quickly once the acceleration starts. It must be cultivated during the slower periods when there's time for careful spiritual development. Like athletes training for competition, those who want to perform well during the final phases must condition themselves during the preparatory seasons. The vision reveals specific practices that enable people to maintain spiritual stability during accelerated change. Regular connection with divine presence through prayer and meditation. Consistent study of eternal truths that provide unchanging reference points amid changing circumstances. Ongoing cultivation of love and service that keeps the heart focused on helping others rather than becoming consumed with personal concerns. But perhaps most importantly, the timeline shows the necessity of developing what Ezra calls prophetic perspective. The ability to see current events within the context of divine purposes rather than being overwhelmed by their immediate emotional impact. Understanding that even disturbing revelations serve positive functions in the larger program of spiritual transformation. The prophet describes this perspective as enabling people to remain calm and hopeful, even when witnessing the collapse of systems they once trusted. They understand that judgment serves purification, that exposure serves liberation, that destruction of false foundations creates space for authentic reconstruction. This prophetic perspective becomes especially crucial as Ezra's timeline approaches what he calls the final convergence, the moment when all the prophetic streams flow together into one overwhelming flood of fulfillment, when political, economic, social, and spiritual transformations happen simultaneously with such intensity that only those with supernatural perspective can comprehend what's occurring. The vision shows this convergence creating unprecedented opportunities for those who are spiritually prepared. Moments when divine authority becomes so obvious that authentic servants can accomplish in days what would normally require years. Periods when spiritual truth carries such power that single conversations can transform entire communities. But the timeline also reveals this same convergence creating devastating consequences for those who have rejected divine truth. The acceleration that empowers authentic servants overwhelms those who depend on human wisdom. The spiritual authority that liberates the righteous exposes and judges the corrupt. Ezra watches as the final phase of acceleration sorts humanity into two distinct groups. those who ride the wave of divine intervention with joy and gratitude, those who are crushed by the weight of judgment they cannot escape or understand. The prophet sees this sorting happening not through external force but through internal response to spiritual reality. People choose which group they belong to through their reaction to divine truth. Those who welcome revelation join the liberated. Those who resist exposure remain trapped in judgment. But even in the final moments of the timeline, the vision shows divine mercy creating opportunities for repentance and transformation. Last-minute chances for people to recognize their error and choose differently. Final invitations for communities to acknowledge their corruption and seek purification. The prophecy makes clear that divine judgment serves redemptive purposes even when it appears destructive. Its goal isn't punishment but correction. Its purpose isn't revenge but restoration. Even the harshest consequences serve the ultimate objective of creating conditions where truth and justice can flourish. This is why understanding Ezra's forbidden timeline matters so urgently for our current moment. If we really are approaching the final convergence, if we really are entering the period of maximum acceleration, if we really are witnessing the climactic fulfillment of ancient prophecies, then every day carries unprecedented significance. The choices we make now don't just affect our personal circumstances. They determine our role in the most important transformation in human history. The spiritual preparation we undertake today equips us for responsibilities we may not even imagine yet. The truth we embrace in this moment positions us for authority we haven't dreamed of possessing. But the timeline also warns that this window of preparation is closing rapidly. The acceleration factor means that opportunities for spiritual development that once lasted for years may now last only months. Chances for repentance and transformation that previous generations could postpone indefinitely must be seized immediately or lost forever. The divine chronometer is ticking toward the appointed moment with mathematical precision. The celestial coordinates are aligning according to eternal purposes. The prophetic program is executing its final subroutines regardless of human opinion or resistance. The only question that matters is whether you'll be ready when the convergence arrives, whether you'll have developed the spiritual resources necessary to navigate the final acceleration, whether you'll recognize the signs of the times and position yourself correctly for what comes next. Because according to Ezra's forbidden timeline, that moment of ultimate decision is approaching faster than most people realize. And when it arrives, the choices you've made during this period of preparation will determine everything that follows. The eagle's final head is already emerging from the shadows of power. The Lion of Judah is preparing to roar with voice that will shake the foundations of every earthly kingdom. The appointed season of judgment is dawning with the inevitability of sunrise, and those who understand the timeline, those who recognize the signs, those who have prepared their hearts for what's coming will witness the most spectacular demonstration of divine justice and mercy in human history. But they won't just witness it. According to the prophecy, they'll participate in it. They'll help establish the righteous kingdom that emerges from the ashes of corrupt empires. They'll serve as bridges between the age that's ending and the age that's beginning. The forbidden timeline of Ezra reveals that this isn't just the end of the world as we know it. It's the beginning of the world as it was always meant to be. And that beginning starts with the choices you make right now, today, in response to the truth you've just discovered. The forbidden prophecy of Ezra stands as one of history's most precise roadmaps to our current moment. But there's one final element hidden within this ancient vision that changes everything we thought we knew about how these end times will actually unfold. You see, most people who discover this suppressed text focus on the political symbolism, the eagle's wings, the timeline of judgment. But buried beneath these surface revelations lies something that religious authorities found even more threatening to suppress. Ezra didn't just witness the fall of earthly kingdoms, he saw the emergence of something so unprecedented, so revolutionary, that it would transform the very nature of human existence itself. The prophet describes this final phase as the moment when the Lion of Judah doesn't simply establish another kingdom. Instead, this divine authority initiates what Ezra calls the Great Restoration. Not just political reformation or religious revival, but the actual healing of creation itself. The reversal of every curse, the correction of every injustice, the restoration of every broken relationship between heaven and earth. But here's what makes this vision absolutely explosive for our generation. Ezra reveals that this restoration doesn't happen through some distant supernatural intervention. It manifests through ordinary people who have been transformed by their encounter with divine truth. Individuals who have paid the price of spiritual purification become the actual instruments through which heaven touches earth. The prophecy shows these prepared servants operating with authority that transcends anything recorded in human history. Not because they seek power, but because they've become so aligned with divine purposes that miraculous results flow naturally through their lives. They speak and circumstances change. They pray and impossible situations resolve. They serve and entire communities experience healing. This isn't religious fantasy or wishful thinking. According to Ezra's vision, this is the inevitable result of the spiritual program we've been exploring. The same divine algorithm that orchestrates the fall of corrupt systems also empowers the establishment of righteous alternatives. The same heavenly timeline that brings judgment also brings restoration. But the prophecy makes absolutely clear that participation in this restoration requires complete transformation of everything we think we know about spiritual authority, religious practice, and our own potential as human beings created in the image of God. Those who witness the Lion of Judah's final victory don't just observe it from a distance. They discover they were always meant to be part of it. The kingdom that emerges from the eagle's ashes isn't built by divine intervention alone. It's constructed through partnership between heaven and earth, between divine purpose and human cooperation, between eternal truth and temporal action. This is why Ezra's prophecy was considered too dangerous for ordinary believers to read. It doesn't just predict a better future. It reveals that you have the potential to help create that future. It doesn't just promise divine intervention. It shows that you can become an instrument of that intervention. The vision suggests that everything we've experienced, every challenge we've faced, every moment of preparation we've undergone, has been designed to equip us for participation in the greatest transformation in human history. The corruption we've witnessed being exposed, the institutions we've watched collapsing, the spiritual awakening we've felt stirring within ourselves, all of it has been preparing us for roles we never imagined we could fulfill. But the prophecy also contains a final warning that cannot be ignored. This opportunity for participation in divine restoration doesn't remain available indefinitely. The appointed seasons have their limits. The celestial coordinates mark specific moments when certain choices must be made and certain commitments must be declared. We're approaching that moment now. The eagle's final convulsions, the lion's emerging roar, the convergence of prophetic timelines all point to a window of opportunity that's both unprecedented and temporary. What you choose to do with the truth you've discovered in this investigation will determine not just your personal destiny, but your role in the cosmic drama that's reaching its climax. The forbidden prophecy of Ezra has been revealed to you at precisely the moment when its message matters most. The suppressed vision has emerged from its hidden status exactly when its guidance is most needed. The dangerous truth has surfaced at the perfect time for you to choose whether you'll be part of the solution or remain trapped in the problem. The choice is yours. The moment is now. The future is being written through the decisions you make today in response to the revelations you've encountered. But remember this as you make that choice. The same divine authority that preserved Ezra's vision through centuries of suppression, the same heavenly power that orchestrated its emergence at exactly the right moment, the same eternal truth that guided you to discover these forbidden revelations remains available to guide you through whatever comes next. The eagle's reign is ending. The lion's kingdom is beginning. The restoration Ezra witnessed is about to unfold in ways that will exceed our wildest expectations. And according to the forbidden prophecy, you were placed in this moment, given access to this knowledge, and prepared through your life experiences to play a part in the most spectacular transformation in human history. The question that remains is whether you'll accept that calling and step into the role you were always meant to fulfill. Because the vision suggests that what happens next depends not just on divine intervention, but on human participation. Not just on heavenly power, but on earthly cooperation. Not just on eternal purposes, but on temporal choices. Your choice, your moment, your destiny. The forbidden prophecy of Ezra has spoken. Now it's time for you to decide what you're going to do about it.